If you want a dramatic symbol of rising economic inequality, then it's hard to surpass those pinnacles of luxury housing in downtown Boston. The units are very expensive, but they've also been very profitable for some investors. That's why some city councilors think the property should be tapped for additional revenue to build affordable housing. To tell us how that might be done is the district councilor representing East Boston, Charlestown, and the North End waterfront. We'd like to welcome Lydia Edwards. Thank you very much for being with us, Councilor.
Thank you again.
Before we talk about the high-rise part of this, you've got a more pressing housing issue right now.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, look, I think a lot of people are unaware that we are aware we're in a shutdown, but a lot of people are not aware of how quickly and acutely it could hurt folks in Boston, if not Massachusetts. The fact is that Section 8 vouchers could be as early as February 1st for some folks in Boston and two buildings, I think, in Roxbury and Dorchester, and others, everyone else, March 1st, will run out of funding. And my biggest concern, and I hope we'll talk about evictions, is that when people are not unable to pay the rent, it doesn't really matter if it's a subsidy or not, that they could be facing some form of eviction through no fault of their own. And so I think people need to be aware of the impacts of the government shutdown, and that it's really going to be impacting some of our most vulnerable individuals, which are low-income seniors here in Boston.
Well, when the rental subsidies don't come through, it's tough on the residents, tough on some landlords too. But what about the evictions? You're working on something with the state senator and you're part of the city. What do you have in mind?
So the Homes Act, which is housing opportunity and mobility through eviction ceiling. So we just call it the Homes Act. And basically we are trying to assure that people have a second chance. There are about 1 million people in Massachusetts with an eviction record. And that could be that they settled it, that could be that they had an agreement, but ultimately they were brought to court for evictions. And regardless of the outcome, they have that record for life. And we have decided as a state that people get second chances when it comes to criminal activity, when it comes to misdemeanors, they have a second chance after 3 years, they can seal their records. Felonies, 7 years. And so what we're saying when it comes to evictions, let them move on. It impacts, as I said, 1 million people. Many of them are women. Many of them are people of color. Overwhelmingly amount of low-income individuals who one day may want to be a homeowner and move on with their lives, but they carry this. And the other thing that we're trying to ban for sure is that no children should ever be named. And landlords do name children and can name children in these, and you can imagine having a young child with an eviction record and how that impacts them as well.
In a way, evictions are a little bit like a mandatory sentence, and even when people don't actually get one, they do things to avoid them.
They do things to avoid them. They may not come to court, or the worst part is when they feel like they did right and they made an agreement and they left, and they still have that record that they were brought to court, that they were potentially evicted. That is used to hurt them to this day. Credit report agencies use it, background check agencies that some of the landlords use that information. They don't seem to care about the outcome. We think outcomes should matter. And at the end of the day, the only outcomes that should be out there are if a person actually didn't pay rent or actually violated their lease. And then even then, 3 years, we think is more than ample amount of time to really judge if a person is a bad tenant or not.
At the other end of the housing market, we have these tall buildings, mostly in the city of Boston. We're not the only city that has this. A lot of the units, at least, are not owner-occupied, if they're not altogether vacant. What's the case for tapping these for additional money?
Well, the case, we've been building it for over a year. The first thing I said when I was my maiden speech was that Boston is not for sale and we cannot build our way out of this housing crisis. At the end of the day, we needed to deal with speculation. So we had hearings on speculations. We had a working session on speculation. My colleague and co-sponsor, Councilor Kim Janey, had a hearing in Roxbury on gentrification. And at the end of the day, the evidence is clear that we are being pushed out, the middle class and working poor, for luxury units. And as much as we would like to say that we're building our way out of this and somehow, some way it'll trickle down, it's not trickling down fast enough and the rents aren't going down fast enough, if at all. So we are inviting speculators to the table and in some cases pushing the flippers off of the table and saying, listen, you are making millions and millions of dollars just off of buying and trading like it's the new stock market. It's our housing market. You're not housing people, you're really just making as much money as possible. So we think a transfer fee would help to slow that down, capture some of that income, and direct it directly towards affordable housing.
Well, of course, what you're also trying to do here is make sure you put the additional tax on the people who don't live here,
Yes.
and shield the people who do live here.
Absolutely, thank you for that. This completely exempts owner occupants. So we don't really, the fact that a family makes money and gains wealth through having an asset for years is a good thing. We are not trying to discourage that. But as you pointed out, those folks who are only here to make as much money as possible off our housing stock, we could be any city to them. They're not invested in this. They're not the ones trying to invest in our little league or be a part of the community in any way, shape, or form. They're here to make money. And if they're here to make money, then we'd like more of it. And we have already built in fees through construction and developers who are regularly here, who are regularly building here. They pay linkage, they pay IDP, but these folks are not interested in those long-term relationships. They're here to make as much money as possible. And when it comes to flipping, we actually provide a provision that the city of Boston could actually tax up to 25% of a flip, if need be, depending on how fast that flip happens. We're only looking at sales between 24 months of purchase and then a resale when we define flips.
If one of these units is owned by a trust, that could probably mean an investor, but I guess conceivably it could mean maybe some family trying to shield their wealth and they actually live in the building. I mean, can the city differentiate between those two?
Yes, and we have when it comes to other definitions of owner-occupant. We can do that also directly in the statute to make sure that if you're the direct beneficiary of the trust and you live in the building, that you are exempt. So we can certainly come up with that. We have the exemptions, as we mentioned, for owner-occupants. We're looking at exemptions for those who are developing and buying and trading for affordable housing. We want to make sure that we exempt those who are doing right by our communities and really target those who aren't.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with the City Councilor from District 1, Lydia Edwards. Another issue you've been concerned about lately is what it's like for women in the workplace, especially City of Boston workplaces. There was a report about their problems on the Boston Fire Department. You were not too impressed with that report.
I wasn't impressed with the report. I wasn't impressed with the process of the report. I wasn't impressed with the person who wrote the report. And at the end of the day, the report's done. So the question is not to continue to beat that horse. The issue is not to continue to go back to what we don't like. I think leadership requires that you produce what you do like, or at least introduce that. And that's what we did. Myself, Councilor Andrea Campbell, and Councilor Zakem, we all decided that we needed to come up with a better process, a better selection, and create this commission that will do the hard asks, that will do the hard that will deliver the hard truths, honestly, to us as a city. Because if we are truly committed to be an equitable city, we need to acknowledge our past. We need to acknowledge what we're doing to actually perpetuate some of those systemic issues. And we need to make sure that we are coming up with real proposals, that we are monitoring when we come up with those proposals. I know this report that came out has 21 different suggestions. Who's monitoring them? Who's checking in with them? Who's holding them accountable if they're not implemented? This is one of, I think, 4 reports on the Boston Fire Department. 4 reports, in many cases, repeating the same thing. That's not a lack of knowledge of what's going on. That's lack of, leadership and holding people accountable.
Aside from providing equal opportunity to jobs and decent treatment for women in the fire department, is there an advantage to having more women on the job force, you think?
I don't know. You let me know. We have a little bit more women on the Boston City Council. I think we're doing pretty good. I think we're doing really good.
Yes.
No, it's not a matter of whether you have more of anybody. It's the fact that the workforce that is funded by the public looks like the public. That's it. If we're a city that is 50-50 in terms of men and women, then I want the City of Boston employees to be 50-50, not more or less of anything. In terms of how we look as people of color, in terms of how we look in terms of, age brackets. There's all different ways in which the City of Boston populace looks, and we want City Hall to look like it.
Another issue you're confronted with in the district right now, and actually many other councilors are as well, is where to have those pot shops located and where they shouldn't be allowed. You've got one proposal for a shop that would be near a drug treatment center. So what do you do about that?
When you have those things, first of all, you remind people that the issue of whether it should be legal or not is gone. It's no longer on the table. We're not going to rehash that debate. And a lot of people still want to have that debate. And I think, a matter when you enter the room, you need to set the tone. We're going to discuss whether this particular location makes sense for this particular business, like we do in every other civic meeting about every other business and every other development. The questions about traffic, the questions about pollution, the questions about making sure that your hours are within the neighborhood. We can stand that you're open at certain times. Those are questions that you should be asking. But at the end of the day, we're not going to be judging, and we're not going to be rehashing the debate of whether we should have legalized or not. And looking to other states. Look, I'm not proposing something that is outlandish or not done before. Colorado has 700 dispensaries, and they have a 1,000-foot buffer zone between their dispensaries and a recovery center. So this is not new. I think that we should be thinking about people on their way to recovery and their impact. And luckily, at our hearing, we had 2 people who were in recovery, and they specifically addressed this issue, both in favor of legalization.
One other concern in East Boston, this is not new, but it keeps happening more and more over the decades. Expansion of Logan Airport, and you got expansion of traffic already in the streets of East Boston. I mean, what do you want to see from that?
There's a couple things. Actually, more than a couple things. A lot of it comes down to planning. A lot of it comes down to transparency in planning. I'll tell you, we had a meeting last night with Mass DOT, and it came down to that tunnel and removing we had the booths beforehand, and to this day, we feel that that decision has not benefited our community. If anything, it's turned us into a throughway. We were always saying we're not a runway, we're not an airport. I'd like to also remind our neighbors to the north, we're not a highway either. My street particularly has become impacted by the amount of throughway traffic. And we have to look at several factors beyond the planning. They assumed it was a 2% increase. It actually was 46%. We have to look at the increase in use of Lyft and Uber and how we can help to decrease those things. At the end of the day, though, it comes basic things down to infrastructure. People will take what is cheapest and most convenient. Right now, it's $4 on a round-trip ticket into Boston from any metro station, or excuse me, any T station. It's $3.50 to drive in. Make a decision.
Well, finally, I'm going to let you boast about something in your district. Last year's pick for School on the Move is in East Boston.
Yes.
With a student body that people didn't expect much from.
Right.
Why is that working so well?
East Boston is an incredible community that sticks together, and I know that our parents are fully supportive and come to our schools, and we're actually the district that has the most walked to students in all of Boston. But I have to speak to the leadership of the principals. I have to speak to honestly how much work we have put into making sure that immigrants feel welcome in our community, that they know that this is their community just as much as anybody else's, and that they have understood that the pathway to being the most patriotic person you can be and to having a huge success is to go to school and to be incredibly successful at that, to learn English. And those kids have done all of that. And I think they've only surprised other people's expectations because other people set them so low. We see those kids every day working extremely hard, and we're so incredibly proud of our community.
Thank you very much for being with us. City Councilor from District 1, Lydia Edwards.